In the beginning, there was nothing. And then there was something. Then there was this little shitty rock floating through space that just so happened to develop life. This life would eventually lead to humans. Now, you probably already knew this because you are presumably a human. Very quickly, these humans would spread like a virus to just about everywhere on said shitty rock, including to this wild place called the Americas. Unfortunately for them, the way they got over here kinda disappeared because the climate is funny. So now they are stuck here with nothing to fucking do except set up little societies. There was a fair bit of farming because that was the hip thing at the time, and there was more of this the more south you got, but the ones in the more northern areas were mostly hunter-gatherers. These tribes kinda just bounced around and followed the food and occasionally fought and traded with each other because these are humans we're talking about after all. In the process, they created their own distinct cultures and beliefs depending on the general area where they ended up. Now, there was a fucking lot of them, and they are generally divided into 6 groups based on relative location, and they were all very different from each other. Arguably, the most important of these groups is the Iroquois, who were the only ones to entirely settle down and do lots of farming, and also develop a totally homegrown democracy. Apart from these 6 main groups is another in the more northern north called the Inuit, an entire culture of the hardiest motherfuckers you will ever meet. Overall, things continue like this for millennia until one day, some guys show up on the East Coast with boats, build strange houses, and then fuck off never to be seen again. Who exactly are you? Oh, me? I'm just here for some grim foreshadowing. Anyways, got a blast. A few hundred more years go by and another guy shows up. His name is John Cabot, and he represents the crown of a shithole called England. He basically just wrote down that there were things here, and then fucked off to try and find the Northwest Passage. Portuguese were the first to actually build anything, and immediately took note and interest in the Grand Banks fisheries because fish is profitable, I guess. It wouldn't stay long though, because there was no gold or spices to be had here, but there was a lot of beaver. And who likes beaver? Apparently the French. French guy shows up and says, "This is all France now. We gotta get in on the circles work naming, so let's call it New France." Genius. Although even that was a little too on the nose, so they elected to refer to the colony as Canada to keep things unique. It was a strange name though, and I doubt it ever really caught on. Now the natives were a tad unsettled by this, because, you know, it's the French. But the French were down to do a lot of trading and alliance making to make that easier, and the big commodity was fur. The European beaver was all but extinct at this point, and the aristocrats wanted something to make them feel rich, and fur shit just so happened to be the call. So, the discovery of all this untapped beaver made explorers and merchants absolutely giddy. In 1608, the first major permanent settlement was founded, Quebec City. It was founded by an explorer named Samuel de Champlain, who also did a lot of mapping and also helped the Huron-Wendat tribe beat the shit out of the Iroquois Confederacy, who then decided to be enemies with the French, during which they totally obliterated a bunch of tribes just to get a fur trade monopoly. This continued until eventually the French just gave up giving a shit and signed a treaty. Around this time, a group of Jesuits would also go on to found a city that would later be called Montreal. Meanwhile, the English were being imperialist and liked to take this area over here and call it Newfoundland. Real creative name. The Scottish also tried their hand at colonizing this place, named New Scotland, or Nova Scotia, but this failed unsurprisingly because Scottish colonies are too cursed even for alternate history. The French and British also did some warring around this time, but it was relatively inconclusive. Now the Brits decided to pull a fast one on the French and get back at them for existing, and popped in behind them on the Hudson's Bay and went down rivers to claim a massive amount of land, building forts and trading posts as they went, founding the Hudson's Bay Company, which even survives today as a nice department store chain with moderate and rather efficient prices. The French didn't really care though, they just went and took Louisiana instead. They did have to cede some shit to the British after a war, and as a result built a big fuck-off fortress on Cape Breton Island called Louisbourg. The seemingly endless state of war between the two powers spooked a lot of people, so the Brits founded a fort city of their own in Nova Scotia named Halifax. War inevitably leads to bigger war, and during World War 0.5, the British would take Louisbourg, then Quebec City, after a meme battle on the Plains of Abraham. The resulting peace saw all of French Canada go to Britain. This meant there was a lot of French people under their rule, so they expelled the Acadians to alleviate part of the problem, most of whom went to Louisiana and became the Cajuns. But this did not entirely change the fact that there were still a lot of disgruntled Frenchies here, and everyone honestly had bigger problems, so they just declared that Quebec could have its own special rights and maintain its own law system. This made Quebec reasonably happy, but you know who it didn't make happy? The Americans. And they are revolting against Britain now. They tried to invade Quebec and got decently far, but it failed because it's cold and there's a whole lot of nothing in between the cities yet. After the war, a whole lot of loyalists from the former 13 colonies fled to Canada. So many showed up, in fact, that an entirely new colony would need to be formed, named New Brunswick. Quebec would also be split in two, a French-speaking Lower Canada and an English-speaking Upper Canada. Lower means upper here, naming conventions are dumb. Upper Canada would have a temporary capital set up near the site of what would become Toronto. Fast forward and now we have the Maple Leafs. So was it worth it? 1812 rolls around and it's time for another American invasion because fuck the British, like actually. It was basically a back and forth where nothing happened except death and both sides claimed the W. Also Britain, with Canadian assistance, torched Washington, specifically the White House GG no re. This was also the last time the native tribes would hold any major influence, as this is the one where Tecumseh dies, breaking his federation's power and further weakening the natives' ability to resist European expansion. Other than that, no borders changed and both sides just kinda focused on other shit. 2 rebellions happened, but they were crushed because Britain was having no more of that shit. After this, they decided they didn't want to deal with another American Revolution fiasco, so they sent a guy called Durham to see what the fuck was going on. He came back and basically said that the best thing to do would be self-government, and the Crown almost immediately elected to do that. The Canadas became just the province of Canada, and they were given a parliament. Also, British Columbia, not that Columbia, this one has a U, exists now. In 1864, 36 guys, of which I can name like 2 off the top of my head, got together in 3 conferences and declared that Canada now exists, and on July 1st, 1867, the Dominion of Canada officially came to be, with its first Prime Minister being John A. Macdonald. Things would get very big very fast, but all the British territory and colonies in the rest of North America, except for Newfoundland, but they just needed a little bit to think it over, being transferred to Canada. BC was lured in by a fucking massive railroad that the government decided to build to link sea with shining sea and make the massive territory of Canada a little more connected. Brought in a bunch of immigrants from China as cheap labor to build the thing, and now there's a massive Chinese minority in the West. Meanwhile, the natives get fucked over even more as the government makes a bunch of treaties that result in most of them being forced onto what are essentially reserves. Also, let's build residential schools to make them read the Indian away. Don't worry, no one will ever know, and we won't have to close the last one until 1996. Jesus Christ, what the fuck. Also, this guy called Louis Riel revolts twice, and now Manitoba exists, and the Métis, which were the offspring of the French and the natives, have rights. Fun times. May as well set up a criminal code while we're at it. And they found gold in the Yukon, which is nice. Now it's a new century, which happens to also be the century where everything happens and humanity's about to step on the gas. Let's start by making new provinces. Alberta and Saskatchewan. They grow a shitload of food and are going to be filled with Ukrainians in a bit. Everything is honestly going pretty great for our fledgling nation, but enough of that boring shit. It's time for war. Canada went in on behalf of their overlords and began their military career by immediately getting gassed. But as it turns out, the Canadians are getting really good at this whole fighting thing, kicking a fair bit of ass and often taking very few prisoners. Meanwhile, Newfoundland also sent some guys over who were immediately tossed away at the Somme in what was essentially a massacre given the title of battle. They also have 2 new guys in charge who are about to work with a certain Australian to casually revolutionize modern warfare. Then Vimy Ridge happens, and as Canadians from coast to coast fight all together for the first time, they manage to pull off what the British and French couldn't do in 3 years in about 6 days. There's also a conscription crisis at home, because of course there is. I certainly hope this doesn't lead to lasting resentment in Quebec and cause any problems in the future. More fun is had at Passchendaele, and they finished the war strong during the 100 Days Offensive, thrashing the Germans to an almost comical degree. Then it was over, and everyone kinda just went home saying fuck you and I'll see you tomorrow. It's the 20s now, and things are going great. Women can vote now, and the economy is chugging. What can go wrong? Oh yeah. A quick constitutional crisis basically severs the British government from the Canadian one, and the big sad crushed the economy like it did everywhere else. Naturally, politicians are kinda dumb, so they sit and do nothing, or not enough for 5 years before actually trying to fix things. They also nationalized 2 pretty important corporations to keep them around, and made 2 more. The last major thing that happened was the Statute of Westminster, which made Canada officially its own separate state in all but name, and very rare circumstances in case the Brits felt the need to interfere. But that isn't important now, because it's officially tomorrow when the world is back for round 2. Canada went in on its own this time, carrying its weight by bullying the German subs, holding Hong Kong for a bit, getting sent to a slaughter at Dieppe, then countering that by absolutely fucking the Germans and Italians in Italy. They also got their own beach on D-Day because we are just that good. They finished her out in the Netherlands and were so loved by the populace that they send us flowers every year. Also, the Japanese got imprisoned because fuck you, that's why. And Canada gradually became closer linked to its big brother downstairs. War's over, this time actually. Canada joins NATO and then goes to fuck around in Korea for a bit. Newfoundland also finally decided to join in the fun, bringing the province count to 10. The Cold War was actually a decent time for Canada, with a prospering economy and a happy populace and oil being found in Alberta, which definitely won't become overinvested in the future, I assure you. Haven't oppressed the natives in a while, so let's displace some of the Inuit for shits and giggles. Foreign policy was all over the place. The Suez Crisis made everyone a little upset at Britain and France, and most politicians did not trust the US. Also, how about we change the flag to something less British? But none of that matters right now because Quebec is about to explode. The Quiet Revolution happens, and now Quebec wants independence. The FLQ kidnapped a couple of guys and now there's martial law because the PM at the time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, decided it was the best thing to do. Quebec had a referendum for independence, but was defeated narrowly, and Trudeau makes Canada officially bilingual. He also goes out of his way to piss literally everybody off, especially the West. In 1982, the Canada Act was passed, officially severing absolutely all possible British influence in government and giving total independence to Canada as a country. This came with a rewritten constitution and a charter of rights and freedoms. Things seem okay until the natives get tired of being fucked with, so they hold a town in Quebec hostage because people keep trying to build on their land. Things get very heated for 2 months, and a straight-up revolt seemed likely, but negotiations restrictions remained and everyone agreed to go home. PM Brian Mulroney resigned in 1993, which led to Canada's first and only female prime minister, very briefly, before she was absolutely crushed in the following election. Now the Bloc Québécois is in the opposition, and there's another independence referendum. Great. This time it was extremely fucking close, but they again voted to remain, and the country was not split apart. Canada would also help invade Iraq the first time, and Afghanistan, and had participated in a lot of UN missions, including one to Yugoslavia and Rwanda, although the UN is an abysmal organization, so the second went rather poorly. Also, NAFTA is a thing now. As the new millennium dawns, Canada is in a very good spot and is one of the world's important players. The government officially apologized to the natives in 2008, finally admitting that genocide is bad, okay? Trudeau is back as of now in the form of his son, which gave half the country flashbacks, but oh well, what can you do? Canada celebrated its 150th birthday in 2017, which finally brings us to today. It's impossible to know what the future holds for this country, but it is full of interesting people with a fascinating history that most Canadians don't even really remember. That about does it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.